Hey there, Spanish learners. Today we have a special treat for you. Today we're going to be talking about the benefits of learning Spanish through stories, and we actually have a special guest, Jorge Garcia from Mero Spanish. Jorge is from Mexico. He's been a Spanish language educator for over 15 years, and he actually publishes a weekly newsletter called Mero Spanish, where you can get weekly insights, tips, and resources all in Spanish for free. One of Jorge's recent newsletters talked about learning Spanish through storytelling, and that's something that we're also super passionate about here at Jiveworld, helping you learn languages through radio stories. So we got together for a short chat on the topic. Una charla, if you will. Pay special attention to Jorge's tips to find out how you can best learn Spanish through stories. All right, so Jorge, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, I was born in Mexico and I lived there for 20 something years. I went to school there. Then I moved to Spain. I lived in Barcelona for 5 years. Then I went to the States and lived there for 15 years. And now I'm living in Ecuador.
Oh, so you're like all over the Spanish
Yeah.
speaking world. I think I consider the US as part of the Spanish speaking world at this point. So that's really exciting. And what is your background in specifically?
Well, I studied philosophy and then literature, Spanish American literature. So I have a
Okay.
PhD in Spanish American literature, a master's in philosophy, and my 9 to 5, so to speak, is I'm a teacher at a college.
Awesome.
Yeah, I teach literature.
That's really interesting though. So you have all these degrees relating to, you said, philosophy and literature. From a literature professor and a teacher's perspective though, what are your favorite stories in Spanish?
Well, I have a lot of favorite
I know
stories.
it's a
Now,
hard
my
question.
go-to, yeah, my go-to is Borges, the short stories,
Jorge
his
Borges.
short stories. So, for instance, on a Saturday when I have a couple of hours and I need to decide whether I read something new and try or read something I know I liked already, I would go to and read some of his short stories.
Yeah, with
But sorry,
Borges, he was most famous for his short stories, right? And I know he also wrote other kinds of things, but the cuento latinoamericano, like Latin American short stories, he's definitely like the Hall of
yeah,
Fame. And
yeah, yeah.
I guess what's your favorite by him, and what's interesting about it?
Well, the one I've been reading lately is La Casa de Asterión. It's a really, really short story about a minotaur. But I read it a long time ago, and then I stumbled upon it, I don't know, a couple of months ago. But the beginning of the story is just amazing. There's this guy who says, I've been accused of being arrogant, misanthropic, and crazy. And maybe crazy, he goes, and maybe crazy. So it's just the beginning. I'm like, who is this guy, right? I need to know who is this person that saying this thing that he's being accused of these three attributes which are not very nice, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then you find out it's a minotaur, and he tells people, "Come to my house whenever you want, take my stuff. I don't care. I'm a nice person, but you think I'm not a good person." So
That's really
yeah, that
interesting. Does I forget, was Jorge Borges, was he part of the like magical realism movement in like the Latin American literature, or was, because that sounds, to me it sounds very like, I don't know, kind of
yeah.
fantasy based. So I don't know if you would consider that part of the realismo.
No, no, he was one of the like precursores, no, the ones who began that kind of fantastic literature in Latin America. But he wrote about 30 years before Realismo Mágico.
Ah, okay, so he was ahead of the wave.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, what an accomplishment. Yeah, I mean, what would you say are the advantages of learning Spanish through stories specifically, as opposed to other methods or, other activities or skills that are not reading based?
Uh-huh. Well, in my experience, it would be the main one would be like the emotional engagement, right? When you get into a story, barriers are down because you're interested in the character. Well, is the story successful, right? But you're interested in the character, what's going to happen, you're anticipating. So situations, actions, discourse, dialogues. So you're already into a mood, so to speak, that allows you to be exposed to language. I think that'll be one of them. Other is that you're seeing language working in real life, although it's
That's
written,
true.
but you see which word goes with which one. You see grammatical structures, syntactic structures, and you see vocab in context instead
Yeah,
of
that's a big thing that, we at Jiveworld always try to stress is just seeing language in its natural environment. And like you said with the dialogues, even though it's not speech, a lot of times if there's quotes and characters are interacting with each other, it's pretty much the same. You just get to process it just without the listening aspect. So that can be really good
yeah,
for the type of like, immersion maybe for
exactly.
the introverts or the people that aren't quite ready for like a conversation yet. They can practice the reading dialogues.
Yeah,
And yeah, I mean the other thing you said about like the emotional attachment to the story, it's really we always try to like emphasize immersing yourself and also attaching like the language to a specific memory. And like if you're in a story, for example, it's kind of like being in a place yourself, like you remember what language was used in what situation, and there's kind of like a timeline, and there's like a context that you can remember. Once if you learn language in the context of a story, it's easier to like cling on to it because it's something solid. It's not just like a word floating around. I don't know if you'd
yeah,
agree with that.
yeah, definitely. And also, you can always go back to it. You know, it's not like you're in a situation in which you need to respond immediately or appropriately according to what the other people or the person is saying. You can take your time and go and look for the word on the dictionary and then go back. And if you didn't understand, you can always go back. Or if you're tired, just close it, see you later, and then go back to it. You know?
Yeah, and I
So
mean that's not just the case with books. Like also the fact that we, at Jive World we host like audio stories. It's
yeah,
also a situation where you can listen, but you're not, required to respond. So yeah, for a learner that's I guess not quite ready to step into a conversation, but wants to, get closer and closer to it, I would say it's definitely a good candidate. But yeah, I mean, going back to stories in general, what advice or like what methods would you recommend to Spanish learners that want to learn better through stories or want to read better, for example?
um, so the first one would be consistency, because learning a language is like any other skill. Well, it's a skill in the first place. So you develop that skill by, sorry, by practicing and repetitions. So read a little bit every day, just a little bit, or as they say in some environments, just show up, just by showing
Just
up,
show up for sure.
just
Especially
open
if
the
it's just
book
reading
and
a story or listening to a story, like, it's just a little bit, no one's going to pressure you to do more or less.
yeah, just a little bit every day, and you'll get the benefits, like the compound effect of doing it every day for a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, before you know it, you've gone through like a whole story just by doing that little bit every day. And once you finish your first story in Spanish, whether that's like an audio story or just a book, it's really kind of satisfying and can keep giving you that momentum. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, do you have any other methods, or was that just kind of the biggest tip is the consistency in general?
Well, that'll be one. The other would be to annotate, to interact with the text instead of just being kind of a passive. Well, it's not really passive, but if you annotate and underline and make circles and arrows, and you're actually co-creating the sense of the story, So this is the character, and he or she is doing this, and then this happened, or yeah, at least it works for me. Like always lines and circles and happy faces and sad faces, or stuff like
You're in
that.
a
It's
way
like,
creating your own kind of experience with the story.
yeah, you're doing that,
I wanted to ask you, you just referred to language learning or earlier knowing a language in general as a skill. That's interesting because it may seem like a simple kind of thought, but a lot of people refer to language skills as a talent. I know maybe it's not completely on topic for what we're talking about today, but how do you view those? Do you view language skills as, or I guess language learning as a talent or more of a skill?
Um, I think it's a skill. I mean, everyone can learn. It's just like math. I'm terrible at math, but if you practice and you get the general idea. But you said it before during this conversation. If you have a like an anchor, like an effective anchor, that helps a lot. And to my students, my Spanish students or students that are trying to learn Spanish, I always tell them, why do you want to learn? But because sometimes they just want to learn because it's a requirement, the foreign language requirement. So yeah, Spanish is better than German or Russian or whatever. But if you have a purpose, it's easier. So you have already an affective or emotional connection to it. The thing is to find that that purpose. But I think everyone can do it. Some people are really talented. They just grasp everything. I have a friend, an American friend, who speaks like an Argentinian, and people think he's from Argentina. And
No,
he learned like
that's definitely, I would say it's a skill within language learning. Even if, people say
yeah,
language learning is a talent, getting to speak a specific dialect, especially one like Argentinian Spanish, that's a
yeah.
whole, that's a can of worms that not a lot of people are ready to open. Why would you say it's important to read in Spanish, as opposed to, practicing other skills like speaking or listening?
Well, I think the first or the main benefit would be that it improves your writing, right? When you read a lot in any language, you have like a model that then you can reproduce in your own writing. So that'll be the first one. No, given that you already look for all the words and got the sense of the story and everything else, no, it improves your writing in Spanish, definitely. And the other benefit or main benefit would be once you're comfortable reading and you know your level, so you can choose an appropriate content or appropriate book, you can learn by yourself. It's like an autonomous learning path is opened to you. So you can just go to the internet and look for stuff that you're interested in, or you have to read maybe, but you can do it by yourself. So that'll be the two main benefits,
I see.
in
That's
my
definitely
opinion. I don't know.
interesting. It's interesting what you said about, reading improves your writing because a lot of times like passive skills, they pair really well with their, corresponding production skills. So like for example, reading it can improve your writing and listening a lot is going to improve like your pronunciation and your conversational skills because you just absorb so much that, it comes naturally after a while if you're consistent enough with the passive activity. And I always recommend that to people as well. If you listen a lot, then you'll have a good accent.
Yeah,
I
right.
get complimented on my Spanish accent a lot, and they're like,
Yeah.
"How'd you do it?" And I'm just like, I listen to Spanish all the time. Are there any, for example, Mexican authors or Mexican story writers that you're a big fan of?
Juan Rulfo, for instance,
I don't think I
classic.
know Juan Rulfo. What kind of topics or what kind of stories did he write?
So he writes about rural Mexico, like post-revolutionary 1930s and 40s.
What are some titles or maybe some of his most famous pieces that maybe our viewers could go check out after they watch this video?
Pedro Páramo.
Okay,
It's a
definitely.
short novel. He actually wrote at the same time as Borges, and they're both considered like initiators of realismo mágico. And they
Awesome.
didn't know each other at the time, so it's pretty cool that two different parts of the hemisphere they were writing more or less the
Yeah,
same
and I
stuff.
mean back in the day there was no like internet. They couldn't
Yeah,
see what other writers were doing. So it's kind of interesting how, Latin American literature developed in that way. I didn't realize that before. I never heard about that specifically. It's very
yeah.
cool.
And contemporary, I would say Juan Villoro. He has this interesting theory about literature. This he said you can write about anything. You can write, even you can have terrible writing, but if you have punch, so he says in Spanish, si tienes punch, si tienes punch, you know. So his stories are. He's always looking for that ending that it's surprising. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So thank you. I wanted to thank you for meeting to chat with me today and giving us all your, perspective on learning Spanish with stories. I just wanted to ask a quick closing question though. So if there was just one general Spanish learning tip or language learning tip in general, you could give to anybody watching, what would it be? Maybe apart from, all the great tips that you've already given in the video.
Mm, try, just try. Doesn't matter if
Do
it's
we want to
correct or
expand on
not.
that or just leave it up to people's interpretation?
No, no, that, but yeah, I mean, if you want to learn, go and open a book and open the YouTube video and listen to music and try to talk to people. Just try and
Yeah, that's a good tip.
that
I
helps.
think starting is definitely sometimes the most intimidating thing 'cause people don't know how, but just taking any first step is usually,
Yeah.
a good way to get into it. That's a great, but cryptic, but great tip, I think.
Should I expand
No, no, no,
or
it's
can I
perfect.
try
It's
another
perfect.
one?
No, it's perfect.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you so much for meeting with me today, and yeah, we'll see you guys in the next video. Qué charla más informativa. We hope you enjoyed it, and Jorge certainly brought up some points that even I haven't considered before. Let me know in the comments what your biggest takeaway was and who you want to see next on Jiveworld Chats. Once again, you can subscribe to Jorge's newsletter at merospanish.com/subscribe, or you can follow him on Twitter at merospanish. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay Jiveworld fluent. See you.